All right, we're live.
Good evening. Welcome to the Privy Council. I noticed the audio was a little spotty on the way in. Hopefully that's a function of the music and not a function of the dulcet sound of our voices. We are, through no fault of watchers, we are having some issues with Rumble this evening. And I don't know that we're going to be able to fix it. We'll keep an eye on that. If not, I would encourage you all to jump over to YouTube, or you can watch it on Twitter. But it will eventually load if you're wanting to watch it on Rumble later. It will eventually load on Rumble. Watcher, if I characterize that correctly.
Correct, yeah. So we've got Rumble set to where even if we have live streamed it there, it still snags our YouTube copy and preserves it there. So a few hours after the live stream ends, once it's done processing, it'll upload there as well.
I'm amazed to a degree. I'm amazed at Rumble's continuing technical issues when you're in a duopoly, and it's sort of like Echo Star or whatever. I mean, how can you not put the money into this to make it work smoothly? I mean, if you're in a duopoly with somebody who's reviled, at least by our community in terms of YouTube, for the editorial aspect of this, how can Rumble not? They need Tucker Carlson, I think, to come in and straighten out Rumble. I think that would be good for Rumble to do, is to try to find a way to bring
honestly,
Tucker
I think
on.
a large majority. I think a large majority of their issues are design decisions, and they're making bad priority design decisions, Stan.
No, okay. I can't speak to that from a technical perspective because I'm of a certain age and a proud card carrying boomer. So I'll leave that to you. But my point is, from a business case perspective, it's sort of amazing to me that they still are having issues. And to answer G-Man's question in the chat, yes, we are having cigars. I've got NC Scout somewhere in the wilds of northwestern Missouri and Quantrill Raider sort of territory. I know he's got a cigar handy, even though he's not on video. Have you got that hat for Rick that you wanted to show him? The Confederate infantry hat?
You know what? Just for you, I'm going to do it.
Okay, I think that's right. Now, that's a fine-looking gentleman with a fine-looking cigar. And you want to tell us about the braid on that hat?
This is a Confederate infantry braid.
All right. Well, so now tell us about what you're smoking.
Got a Privy El Gran Rey. It's a Nicaraguan.
Outstanding.
It is absolutely wonderful cigar.
So I'm looking for the chat to chime in and tell me if you're partaking in cigar evening. I'd like to know what you're smoking. I'm smoking Rocky Patel here in just a minute. And
it's what we want.
Huh? This is a vintage 1999 Connecticut wrapper. So I'm looking forward to this in just a minute. And you're somewhere near the home of William Quantrill. Is that correct? Okay. So that's
here in Missouri, I've got the RTO, Advanced RTO, Signals Intelligence course going on. It is a full class, and we're having a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, what you said a few minutes ago before we're going on was pretty amazing. So if you're inclined to share, you can. If not, I understand that too. it's operational security in some way, shape, or form. So I'll leave that up to you. And our drag queen for the evening, Victoria, is in the house. So Victoria, old Hong Kong, Victoria Regina, I guess it is, right?
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah. and
Speaking
and
of leadership,
and has Mrs. Hong Kong allowed you to light up a cigar somewhere in your domain, or
that'd
no?
be a hell no in the house.
That's kind of what I figured. I sort of figured that. So Rick Duke of Malta's got a Romeo and Julieta, Romeo 2 Havana, Cuba, Corona size. I think that may be the leader in the clubhouse at this particular point. So I'm looking forward for any other. And I expect Ron will be in. He's at a fire board meeting. He will be in soon, and I expect him to bring in a cigar of some noteworthiness. So, and I think Joe Dolio is out on executive protection detail, but I think he will be joining us once he's finished up with dinner. Things, if you watched Future Conflict, you have some idea what was going on. He's in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and I think things went smoothly. Watcher, I think you watched that a little more closely, but are we pretty happy with the way things unfolded there, or not?
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff I need to get done. I need to get the branding for that channel or for that show worked out, but everything went quite well.
Good.
I think.
Good.
So.
Good. Our discussion this evening is going to be focused on two things. One is the situation in Sudan. I find it really interesting as to what's going on in Sudan, both the backstory and the current conflict, and looking around the corner, as we like to do here, looking around the corner, what it may mean to Africa and the region. I think we have some concerns that this thing is going to become a festering sort of wound for quite some time, and that is sort of the history of the Sudan. I mean, the war with Darfur went on for a decade. A lot of people got killed. The country's never really been at peace. There was a schism. Southern Sudan broke away from Sudan. There's been a coup in 2019, and so, like a lot of Africa, it's had its real challenges. And now I think what you've got is a couple different warlords, one who's ostensibly the government, one who wants to be the government, both with a couple decades of experience fighting a variety of wars in Chad, in Darfur, in Yemen, in Libya, as we'll talk about, that are sort of going toe to toe just to see who the big dog is in the Sudan. And there's a lot of people watching closely and involved in trying to influence the outcome. And the list includes, but is not limited to, the United States of America, the Russian Federation, the United Arab Emirates, warlords in Libya, warlords in Yemen, and Saudi Arabia, just to name a few. And so it's a kind of a toxic brew, which we'll talk a little bit about, but let's get involved. Let's go. Let's get this underway, and I'm going to get lit up here in just a minute, and we'll go on. We'll go on from there. Oh, and our second topic is I'm really interested in our viewers' view of the prospect of Trump v. Biden 2.0 in 2024. And how that makes you feel in the way of an election, do you really think it's likely that Joe Biden's going to make it all the way to the election, or that the Democrats may have different plans for different people in this instance? And there are some signs that may be true. And then does Trump really have a hammerlock on the Republican Party at this point, or is there room for somebody else to be the candidate there, and if so, who? And we'll talk a little bit about that after we get done with Sudan. So I think on the left you have the tweet that I sent around with this notice that says, Sudan is the top 10 hits in Sudan are: 1, Victoria Nuland's involvement; 2, we sent roughly $300 million to the guy who is the general on the government side, to try to get him to convert to democracy. He said no. We've got dueling warlords, as I said. We've got Wagner, who's in country and has been there for longer than most people appreciate, I believe. And the Sudanese government giving an approval for a Russian base on the Red Sea. That's all led to really civil conflict, and in the immediate aftermath of that, we've had another sort of messy embassy evacuation, and we've got another group of some thousands of U.S. passport holders who seem to be left and on their own and trying to get a ride out however they can, whether that's a French aircraft or some other way, or a UN convoy to the Red Sea. We're not covered in glory as it relates to this. And the thing that most people care about in Sudan is now gold production, and that's hit a record in 2022. And as you'll see, you've got these two generals on both sides of the trade there, and the UAE in the middle of all of it, on almost all aspects of Sudanese commerce, and also sort of Pan-African militia movements, Libya and elsewhere. And if that isn't enough to keep you up at night, we've got a World Health Organization biolab in country that's now in the hands of one of the rebel leaders. And I think the thing that concerns me the most is the fact that on Monday, in the aftermath of evacuating 70 of the 16,070 Americans who were in country, Joe Biden exercised his constitutional authority and sent a war powers notice to Congress saying that he'd done this and that we were going to be there for a while, but we didn't know for how long. And we weren't quite sure what it was going to mean and what it was all going to take. But he's at least put the marker down that says he's got the authority to exercise American military might in the region, from Djibouti, at least initially, but who knows after that. And that's kind of how we got started in Syria. And that doesn't seem to be trending well. And I'm kind of interested to see where this may go. So on the right-hand side are some cliff notes that you've probably seen on Twitter. I think this is a nice little summary of who, what, when, where, how. And you'll see that in August of last year, we ended up sending an ambassador back to Sudan after 25 years of not having one. And about a month after he got there, he starts warning the Sudan about finalizing a Russian naval-based deal. And then after that, Blinken decides he's going to get involved in this. And I'll let Jim speak to this because this is his stock and trade, and he can do this with his eyes closed, about Blinken sort of setting out all the conditions for American engagement in Sudan, of which a civilian-led transitional government is only the tip of the iceberg. And we know what all else comes with this. And then the UN tried to broker a deal between our favorite two warlords. That all went the way that most things go in the way of the Sudan. So then Blinken begins to threaten the Sudanese. And the Sudanese say, you know what? I think we'll do a deal with the Russians. We'll give them a naval base. And then we tried to bribe them 4 days later with $288 million in humanitarian aid. And if you're not an aficionado, or you're not really engaged very much in the aid effort of the U.S. government, humanitarian aid means it can be just about whatever you want it to be for, and that includes Swiss bank accounts in many, many instances. So late to the party, on the wrong foot, we just threw $300 million at them and said, "Oh, please like us," and that has not played out well. And to close that, we sent Victoria Nuland, who I guess I don't know if that's a threat or a promise, if you know who Victoria Nuland is. And so in the meantime, about a month after that, the RSF, which we'll talk about who that is in the history context of the Sudan, and General Burhan, who's the effective government in Sudan, started shooting at each other. And it's been sort of downhill from there. I'm going to let my two colleagues comment on their observations with respect to any aspect of this that they want.
What I'm finding amazing is just the pattern with which we lay down the rules. And we're like, okay, well, all you people who are in charge now, we're going to go back and we're going to demand that the military step back and we're going to put in a civilian government. And it really doesn't work in a place like this where you have these perfect schisms. You got the Arabic North, you got the Animist South, and you have people who've created forces. RSF are emblematic, and the Janjaweed were emblematic, but they're separate forces that have their own motivations. You just can't say to them, give everything up and let's throw everything into the pool. It just doesn't work in a place.
Congratulations. Here's your copy of the Declaration
Yeah,
of
exactly.
Independence. Thomas
Yeah,
Jefferson, you may have heard of him. Thomas Jefferson wrote this, and we'd like you to take this to heart. And we're looking for your George Washington, Sudan. Who is your George Washington? Who is not tempted by the aspect of unlimited power, having fought 15 years to get there, who's willing to turn the government over, hard-won government rights over to a group of elected illiterates in the case of the Sudan, and if you do that, then we'll help you out. That's our message to the Sudan.
Yeah, so I mean, we bought in on this complexity, and we've seen outside groups funding the complexity, whether it comes in from the north, from Libya, or from the issues in Eritrea. South Sudan's been a mess for decades, but everything to the west of Sudan is a bit of a mess too. Central African Republic, Chad, Burkina Faso, everything across the Sahel. So betting on something complex like this, going into a place where there are multiple parties, and the United States comes in with its friends, right? So read, what is there's a whole list here: Japan, Britain, France, Switzerland, EU. But what's absent is there are no African countries on board, and there are no Middle Eastern countries on board.
Not a one.
It's the United States and Europe coming in and said, this would be the good thing for you to do, given that we've been dumping aid in here for 20 years. And oh, by the way, you need a democracy.
Oh, and by the way, you may remember us because we've been colonial. Various aspects of us have been colonial powers
been here
for 150 years, right?
Yeah. So it's they're very unwilling to accept localism, I think is the way to put it. And this was just one of those perfect places for localism to reappear. And it comes down to who controls the coal mines and who controls the transit to the other countries that are landlocked. Logistics and money and logistics. And it doesn't suit the United States to recognize that. It suits Russia and it suits China. It really doesn't suit American perceptions of power.
Well, and it very much suits the Gulf states, who've got sort of a hammerlock on this part of Africa, and don't seem to want to give it up, and are so intent on keeping that hammerlock there that they'll play both sides against the middle, as we'll talk about as we get into this in a bit more detail. Matt,
the Middle Eastern states are the traditional mechanism that went into these animist areas and brought Islam with them, and they have long-term relationships into these areas. And I think they're willing to reassert themselves in this case and be the banker, be the conduit, be the supplier of structure. The question is, does that fit with American policy? Well, clearly not, because everybody associated with us is trying to get on the small number of aircraft that came in and out. I mean, we had the Germans and the British complaining at each other because the British didn't plan accordingly, and the Germans couldn't organize something to get their people out. So they were, quote, delayed. I mean, this is one of those classic scenarios where we've overplayed, we've overpromised, and we're bringing in a prepackaged democracy box.
You know what though, Jim, it's actually got much more hubris attached to it than that. We've been absent from the region for 25 years. We show up late because, as you'll see as we get into this, Wagner's been on the ground since Joe Biden's inauguration, almost coincident with Joe Biden's inauguration. So call it 2020. And what they bring to this is the notion that says, if you're our friend, you're our friend. And if you don't ask me, if you ask for references, then Bashir Assad is willing to take your phone call and tell you that we're we're a friend. If we're a friend, we're a friend. It doesn't matter how bad it gets, doesn't matter how ugly it gets, doesn't matter how whatever it gets, we're your friend. And you can juxtapose that with Mikhail Saakashvili and Guaido of Venezuela and a handful of other people who've been America's friends, who are now either in hospitals or have been kicked out of the country with a book bag over their shoulder on a economy flight to Miami. And you could make that decision who you want to be friends with. And that's a pretty powerful message in the context of, if I'm a guy who's raised an army and fought for 15 years to get to the top of the pile in my country, just to hand it over to a bunch of illiterate sheep herders, for what? And I just think that we're so tone deaf as it relates to all aspects of realpolitik in this part of the world that we ought to just sort of chill and not get involved for a while. But that's my view.
Well, I don't think it does. It doesn't improve anything. We step in, as you say, we step in late. I mean, Wagner's been in Libya working with them. It's almost logical for them to move south to the next area of dispute and participate in the riches that are available.
Yeah, they're doing a pretty good job of that, by the way.
Well, but you could predict it if you were actually paying attention. I don't do this during my day job, but I sit here and look at it and go, how do you not understand that this is the nature? We saw what happened in the French holdings when the French came out. Russians were right behind them, came in and backfilled them. This is a pattern in North Africa. And for some reason, we really can't get in front of it. And it's probably because we're not offering an alternative. I mean, the alternative appears to be we send in people who make long-term promises, throw money at a problem, which is pocketed quickly. And then there's no hammer. The hammer is we won't like you, or we might fly drones in and take out the most extreme of you. But there's no developmental policy that has any value to the leadership, clearly. Yet we make these claims that we can help the people. That doesn't seem to sell. It isn't something that it isn't sticky.
No. No. Matt, any comment from your perspective on this?
Well, to me, all the political commentary is spot on, and I don't have any disagreement or really anything to add to that. To me, my perspective is what's most concerning is not that Sudan's in yet another state of chaos. We already know that. They're going to be in a perpetual state of chaos. What's concerning to me is that this is the second exposure of the fact that we had a laboratory that was working on some sort of highly infectious, extremely dangerous disease now, right? We had the revelation of Ukraine. Now we have Sudan, which is literally, why would we have a lab there that's working on polio? Knowing what we know now from the past 3 years of what we learned, how we've been lied to, et cetera, what were they doing with polio there? Now it's fallen into quote unquote rebel hands. The United States does not have a good track record of supporting third world rebels. And now they have a potentially highly infectious biological weapon on their hands. What are we doing? This is, to me, this is so much more concerning than any of the geopolitical aspects, is the fact that we do not know exactly what was occurring in that. We'll say we don't know what level of lab that was. It was a BL4 lab that was, we'll say, in the interest of objectivity, that they were studying polio, right? Why were they doing that outside the purview of Western standards of safety, Western standards of medicine? Sudan is not the country that I would say would be the gold standard in security of biological labs.
It's not the biotech hub that Boston is. Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. It's
So, with that said, what were they working on there? What has now been exposed? And now what is in the hands of people who are highly unstable at best? The Newland and Co., which we have the smoking gun, all right? Newland, Blinken, the whole operation, they have put America in jeopardy how many times now? It's too many times to count. This is so far out of hand, and this is so far beyond United States versus Russia versus China, or geopolitical, the game of risk. This is so far beyond all of that. They've put all of us in a high amount of jeopardy.
Well,
Inexcusable.
and let's just assume for a minute that we're Watcher. Can you pull up the map? I think that's the next slide in this deck, because I think the context of the map is great. So you see Sudan. It's that Texas-sized sort of country there in northeastern Africa. This map's pretty old because it doesn't carve off South Sudan. So there's a portion of that that's now, quote, independent, unquote. That only cost a couple 100,000 lives. The west of the country is what used to be called Darfur. That was a decade-long civil war. That cost a couple 100,000 lives, and even got George Clooney all teary-eyed about it. And so you see Ethiopia and Eritrea, there's been conflict back and forth there. You've got Libya, which we fixed by killing Gaddafi because he gave up his nuclear weapons program, as Hillary asked him to do. And we schwacked him for it, and she cackled about it, if you recall. Well, that's now a hot mess with elements of the conflict in Sudan actively involved on both sides there, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And so down in Kenya and Somalia, there's an outfit called Al-Shabaab that is a problem for most of the rest of the world. Do you think Al-Shabaab has any interest in maybe getting access to any weaponized componentry within that lab? And to be fair, that was a World Health Organization lab in Sudan. But now that it's in RFS's hands, do we really think that the guy who runs RFS has got enough control over this to keep this stuff from being, on eBay, terrorist eBay? I don't know if Silk Road's not around anymore, but do we think that there's not some sort of terrorist eBay where you can put this stuff up for sale to the highest bidder and get paid in Bitcoin and not know what's going on?
Yeah, nobody seems to want to talk about what was in the fridges, but let's just hope somebody unplugged them before they left.
Yeah.
And they ran out of diesel fuel.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all you can hope. It's hit the burn button.
Let me ask Ron to sort of. First of all, let me say hello to Ron. Welcome. And let Ron get caught up with us here. Ron, I don't know if you got the message about it being cigar night. I would like this in a minute.
I have a cigar, but I can't light it in the house. So, but I'll wave it around and pretend.
Okay. And let me extend greetings to you and let you voice your opinion, if you will.
Well, I heard what Scout was saying there, and I got it. One of the reasons they're studying polio in Africa is, guess where polio is resurgent? Oh, Africa. And I'd rather study it there, where it already exists, than bring it to the United States and study it here. So we're reacting to a lot of stuff we don't know. We don't know what's actually going on with the lab. What did they do to shut it down? Somebody mentioned diesel fuel generators. So there's lots of unknowns. So let's all take a breath and let's just relax for a minute or two, and we'll let it all sort of let the dust settle. Let's get some real information before we start putting on our Mop 4 gear and running for the hills.
Well, I understand that, but from what I've seen, that the activities in this lab also extended to smallpox and Marburg and a couple of other sort of things we just don't want in general circulation.
No,
And, and I
but
think
again, let's just settle. Let's just wait till we get some information on what the status of the lab is, because I'll tell you that there were other things in countries that used to be controlled by terrorists or regimes unfriendly to the United States
Mhm.
that were nuclear, biological, or chemical. You take your pick, and but they never once broke quarantine, containment, however you want to put it. And when we arrived, we secured it. So I'm just saying, I'm just going to take a breath here and just not go hyper ballistic
Yeah,
on this. I mean,
I'm gonna,
I get all the
I'm gonna,
concerns,
I'm
but
gonna push back on this just a little bit for just a minute, Ron, and that
okay.
is, I think you're probably referring to labs in the former Soviet Union post collapse of the Soviet
No,
Union.
I am not.
Okay, so
But I can't really get into it. But I'm just going to say that I think that there's plenty of there's there's just not enough information that
fair enough.
we have.
And
So
and if the only risk in the Sudan was, wet cleanup of the WHO lab there, then that would be a great thing in its own regard. But the problem is that we may be involved in another sort of proxy conflict in the context
oh
of
yeah,
Sudan.
no,
And
I get all that.
I
I
understand.
mean,
I'm just trying to,
so
if we're
no,
gonna parse this, that's all good.
but we just
let's
need to balance it instead of like you know freaking out because I get it. Al Shabaab would love nothing better, but I don't know that they have the technology to weaponize it so much, and of course the whoever controls those labs or lab and the items therein, he's going, oh, why should I give up my trump card to you know do this and raise my profile? I'll just keep it here and become the big man on campus. So, anyways,
No,
hi.
that's a great point. That's a great point. So let me go back to the map if I could, Watcher, because I think it's great to be able to sort of talk a little bit about these are the names of countries you'll hear as it relates to the potential for a broader conflict with respect to Sudan. Um, Sudan fought a long war with Chad immediately to its west. And I don't think that there's a lot of love lost between Chad and the Sudan at this particular point. We've talked a little bit about Wagner Group and and we'll talk more about their involvement on both sides of the equation in Sudan. And more recently, Wagner Group has been active in Burkina Faso, which you'll see further to the west, in Niger, which you'll see, in Mali, which you'll see, and some notion that they're mucking around in Chad. We know that Wagner is involved in Libya, in supporting one side of what is a civil conflict in Libya. Egypt is nervous, I think, at this particular point in the context of what happens there. Not least of which is forget the labs, forget the gold mines, forget the rest of that sort of stuff. There's a sort of existential issue that exists between all these countries that sit on the Nile, blue or white, upper or lower. And
Mhm.
if you see on this map, starting in Ethiopia and in southern Sudan, the sort of wiggly line that makes its way to the Mediterranean, that's the water in that part of the world.
That's it.
And there is a lot of consternation about who gets to build dams where and when and how much outflow they're going to allow in the context of what moves downstream ultimately to Egypt and Egypt's need for water to feed its own people, in addition to grain from Ukraine. So there's a lot of you know things that people are fighting about in very poor areas, and then you've still got the Ethiopian, Eritrean, Tigray miss, and the failed state that is Somalia, and every once in a while that spills over into Kenya. So if I've left anything out, I'm going to let Jim or Ron or Matt sort of fill in the blanks as it relates to sort of tension points across this part of Africa, none of which are served by having a civil war in a country the size of Texas, smack in the middle of it.
Did you cover the Central African Republic Empire, whatever they are, this week?
No, I haven't.
Oh, good. Well, no, let's. It'll just further confuse the. You can't tell all the players without a program, and believe me, there's way too many players, and they're all shooting at everybody. And but you did a great job, Sam. I mean, you covered it basically from sea to shining sea, if you will.
Well, and I haven't talked about Yemen, but we will as we get into this, because Yemen's also been a point of contention on the other side of the Red Sea. So
right,
that's kind of where, but it's involved troops from Sudan, or at least one part of Sudan.
Right.
And that's
there's that whole thing. I mean, the whole African continent from top to bottom, east to west, is just overwhelmed with crises, conflicts, famines, tribal disagreements. It's beyond salvage and beyond solving, I believe, at this point. I studied Africa in grad school a little bit, and one of the things that always stuck out is that, and I think, and you know this, and a lot of folks know this, all these borders are European colonial borders. They're not natural borders.
right.
And the only true nation in all this conglomeration, at least on the Africa part of this map, is Egypt. I mean, it's the only one that has historically been a nation since, I don't know, recorded history.
Time immemorial, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, everything else is an artificial creation, and a lot of these borders intersect, overlap, divide tribal lines. They've mashed tribes that hate each other together, and friendly tribes are on the wrong side of the border. They interfere with Sahara caravans and east-west trade, north-south trade. I mean, oh my God, it's a whole Pandora's box of just about everything. So, and it's I mean, I had one professor, he asked me one day, well, what would you do? And I said, I'd get the biggest ass chain link fence, put it around the whole freaking continent, throw a bunch of guns in the middle, and say, with a note saying, we'll come back in 50 years and see who's left.
Yeah, that's
the guns are there, Ron.
Well, this was, come on now, this was back in the early 80s when I said this. So, we had just come out of the Angola and the Mozambique crises.
Yeah, the AK shipments were just starting.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of them had Cuban writing on them, Spanish writing. But no, I mean, and of course he kind of didn't. He said, "Well, you're not being serious. I'm going to give you a C." I go, "Okay, fine. I really don't need this class."
The C, sir.
Took your gentlemanly C and moved on, huh?
No, I got an A out of the class eventually. I mean, I don't want to bore the class with a 1 hour answer of the professor's question, because I did like you did, Stan. I went almost country by country, conflict by conflict, again back in 1985, and just kind of went through it all, and with some historical references, and a lot of Africa was and still is suffering decolonialization. I guess that's a word. Trying to come to grips with their colonial past and how to adapt to their new bureaucracies, their governments, which is why they have a revolving door. And I think every president, emperor, dictator in Africa has a standing reservation to on a jet somewhere at his home airport and a condo in Paris.
Yeah. And those countries that are still in Francophone Africa are still paying the vig to the Central Bank of France.
Right.
And
there's still a lot of French military presence there. I mean, there's Foreign Legion battalions and detachments throughout the former Francophone African areas, and the French Legionnaires they're quite motivated, and they're well resourced, and they don't look anywhere as near as good as Joe. Hi, Joe.
Joe, I hear that congratulations are order, mission accomplished. well done, you. And we're gonna step out of Sudan for a minute and ask for sort of a sit rep on your activities this afternoon, early evening,
Well,
if you're so inclined.
yeah. Without letting any cats out of the bag, Liz Wheeler gave quite a speech at James Madison University, fired up the locals. The police initially told me 500 protesters. It looked like we actually had about 1,500 marching across the lawn at us.
Mm-hmm.
But
Let's say 2,000.
we had a pretty good speech, or 1,500, not 15,000. 1,500. We had a pretty good speech, a lot of great interaction. She addressed a lot of questions. You can find the video on Facebook, but everything went fine. Got her in and out safely, and just had a nice dinner with the team. And more to come on this. Lots more events planned.
Great. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear that. And I've not watched the video yet, but my understanding from a comment that I saw is that somehow or another she was channeling my thoughts on gender dysphoria. So
Literally, she gave the same definition you did.
Happy to hear that. Yeah.
And she said that, listen, I care for you people, and I would like you to get the mental help that you deserve rather than be lied to. Yeah. And it was a fantastic speech, and she destroyed all of their arguments. It was pretty wonderful.
Good. Glad to hear it.
So Joe, it was 1,500 protesters? How big was her audience?
Well, we only allowed in 200 because of the size of the room. We had to turn away. We turned away over 1,200 people.
Oh, wow.
No,
good. Well, good.
Shenandoah Valley is still on the beam. That's good. I'm glad to hear
Absolutely. And you know what? A big shout out to the JMU police and the Virginia State Police. Fantastic work. They really were holding the line and didn't give me a lot of the problems I get from some campus police departments. So outstanding work.
Well, you look like a long-haired hippie. I'm not surprised.
Right. Anyway, it's a good
That's
time.
actually good to hear, Joe. That's good.
Good job, Joe.
Yeah, Thanks. Very nice to see that.
So we're talking Sudan.
And we've sort of walked through a little bit of the the geopolitical importance of Sudan and its sort of role in being either a source of conflict or both external and internal. And so we're about to get into this a bit more. If you want to say anything about Sudan at the outset here, please do that. And if not, we'll dive in.
Well, I think that the biggest thing is that timeline we talked about. It's important to note who lines up where. The RSF lines up firmly in the Russian camp, and General Buran lines up squarely in Victoria Nuland / Barack Obama's camp. So I think that brings us up to speed.
No, it's good to have you step in at this point, because they announced today that the USS Chesty Puller is going to be brought in off the coast. So the chances of us not getting involved don't appear to be there.
I think the thing that I'm really worried about is I made mention of this is that this sort of open-ended, mushy War Powers Act notice that Biden filed with the Congress, as he's constitutionally or statutorily required to do, really didn't really say much other than we expect to be there for a while and we'll have more people at Djibouti and he's got license to sort of go out and muck about at this point.
Sort of like he was trooping the line today with the South Korean president.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
God. That's my thought exactly, Ron.
I sat
here shaking my head all afternoon.
Oh my God! If they need to get like the guy in baseball that does the chalk lines, around the bases. Yeah. They need to do that for Joe. So Joe, follow the white line. He's kind of like And the Army Honor Guard commander, Lieutenant Colonel, Major Colonel, I don't know, whatever. He's sitting there kind of like, with his sword up and he's like, Mr. President, right here. It's almost like he wanted to grab and hold his hand. And the South Korean president, he's just like, hey, this is great. I'm trooping the line. Damn, Joe, keep up. Come on. So it was sad. Really, really sad.
Well, I think the new news that I saw was that Joe Biden decided to say to Kim Jong-un that if they went nuclear, that we would end them. I don't think that's news. to the North
Well,
Koreans.
and the way he said it, he didn't say it. He said if if a nuclear attack comes from North Korea, we'll end the regime that launched it. Like, huh?
Yeah,
It was-
exactly.
It's like, who the hell is your speechwriter? Oh,
But-
Kamala Harris's. Never mind.
Well, I'm curious where the chesty puller came from and what they think it's going to do. It's got 2 Marines, 98 sailors, and 50 civilians on board. So,
Well, I
Well, there's
think that's
also a
permanent.
DDG out there as well. That's
yeah,
on I guess it's show the flag. Ooh, the big battle
Yeah.
flag flying off the midships there, and
It's a safe
yeah, they're
place
going to
to
be
land a helicopter.
they're going to be steaming off the coast of Port Sudan and between Port Sudan and Jeddah and things like that. But I mean, it's a DDG. It's not like it has
not like it
land
has a
attack
landing
missiles
team. Yeah.
or a landing team or it has one helo for
Well, the puller being an
ASW type work.
ESV is meant to operate with an amphibious ready group. We don't have one in the Atlantic/Med right now, so
No, they're
it's a
both
pretty
having
ship. But
they're
yeah.
both having their tropical vacation in the Pacific.
Absolutely.
So if you're one of the 16,000 or so, give or take, of folks that are still trying to get out that have blue passports, let's say United States of America, what's your options, guys, at this particular point? If you can make it to the Red Sea, do you get to get on the chesty puller, or do you get to get on the
Well, if you can find a
DG3 or-
boat to take you to the chesty puller.
Yeah. So I just
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really disturbing to me is that yet again, the country under Joe Biden has shown a disregard for the safety of American citizens or people who have the right to be,
too hard.
It's
we
too
might,
hard
we might,
It's
we
too
might
hard
get,
to organize a NEO. Come on now.
we might
Oh
get
my
bad video
God.
out of this, and we're launching an election campaign. So I don't know.
And besides, Stan, most of them are dual citizens, and the Sudanese, they don't look like us. They look like
Well,
corn pop.
Yeah, exactly right.
I'm sorry. I'm
that
sorry. It's
that doesn't jive with the video that we're going to watch. And with Joe,
don't you dare. I just had dinner, dude. You show me that, I'm going to be hurling.
I'm going to warn you ahead of time. We're a ways away from that, but I am going to comment on that video of Joe's reelection campaign because I think there are 3 white people in it, and 2 of them are Joe and Jill Biden.
And the other one's a trans person.
Yeah, the other one is probably a trans person. So,
Hey, real quick. Sorry. Go ahead, Stan.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, please.
No,
go ahead.
there's a question in the chat. What's a DDG? Although he typed DGD. A DDG is a destroyer guided missile. These are one of the Burke class, and I think this one is one of the early or middle. I mean, the Burke class is huge, and but you can look it up. Go to U.S. Naval Institute, and they have a fleet ship monitor that is about 2-3 days old, but it'll give you what the ship is and stuff like that. And it's got ages. It's all good. It's all good for anti-air warfare and anti-submarine warfare, kind of, sort of. But yeah, it's as Joe said, it's not much. It doesn't have any Marines, but it does have a great soft ice cream machine.
Well,
Anyways,
which isn't working.
priorities.
yeah.
All right, let's get
vanilla ice
back.
cream is racist.
Let's get back to our conversation then. Watch your historical perspective. Many of you know this, and I'm not going to belabor this, but and this is, I think, to cite the source here. I subscribe to Rybar at Rybar on Telegram, and I find that they do a pretty good job of despite their Russian orientation, they do a pretty good job of A, translating the Russian into English, and B, sort of being concise about who, what, when, where, how. And so you hear the term Janjaweeds thrown around. That was a tribal sort of coalition that was active in Darfur, in the basically the Arab tribes versus Black Africans in Darfur. Take it out of the wrapper, my man.
I can't. Then I'll have to smoke it, and inside the house, I'll be in divorce court by morning.
Okay. All right. And then you've got the actual military of the government of Sudan, as Joe said, General Burhan. Uh, Over the years, these two groups have not really gotten along very well. And when Omar al-Bashir was president of Sudan, he sort of played one off against the other in the context of maintaining his power, and also used the RSF, or what became the RSF, as sort of shock troops in terms of doing certain things for them. And there's been a lot of animosity back and forth between the army and the RSF. If I can go to the next slide, please. um, um, Watcher, if I can go to the next slide, that'll help.
This is the next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you want the next one after this?
Yes, please.
I hear the Jeopardy song.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I just went through 3 of them.
I'm back. What'd I miss?
A couple of slides. Let me do this. Let me do this from memory. No, back up. Let's just stay right there for a minute. I'll get caught up with the narrative until we get to this. So when Bashir was removed in a coup in 2019, essentially the traditional army became the government. But what's happened in recent years is that the RSF has basically taken over a goodly portion of the gold producing. And the reason why people care about the Sudan from a financial perspective is it's become, I guess, top 15 or so in gold production. But it's rising pretty quickly in terms of its capacity to produce gold and gold mines. And that has been sort of the coin of the realm in the context of funding both the military side and the RSF side of the equation, such that the guy who now runs the RSF, who founded and now runs the RSF, I'll use his nickname Hamedi because it's just easier, is the largest producer of gold in Sudan, and that attracts attention from Abu Dhabi and the UAE in the context of their interest in gold. But it's a situation where these two sides don't like each other. They don't trust each other. They've been sort of played off against each other by the guy who was in charge in the Sudan, and now that he's gone, these guys are sort of fighting to see who the big dog is going to be. And somebody made the comment that Burhan is sort of in the U.S. camp. There's some aspects of that point to the contrary. I think to say it's a mess and that Wagner is playing both sides against each other is something that we'll try to clarify that for you. But it is a mess, and we'll talk a little bit about how that may create some problems.
You made an interesting comment this afternoon, Stan, which was the second funniest thing of the day after the Biden and the Korean president not being covered by the media. It was the comment about artisanal mining. Was it you, Joe, or is it Stan? It was somebody.
It was Stan.
Artisanal mining, and I'm sitting here laughing because this is exactly what this is.
Well, I can't take credit for that. I have to give credit where credit is due. And I think it was either Canine Reaper or Gideon, and it was in the context of the discussion about South Africa.
Yeah, it was Gideon. Yeah,
that the phrase artisanal mining sort of came to the fore. But I just fell in love with it because I think I think about it in a whole food context.
It's like $5 tomatoes.
Yeah, we've got artisanal broccly here, and
I got my $5 tomato. But this whole part of the world, right, is you can't, so you get mining rights. They're good for 6 months.
I mean, look. It's real simple. Everybody in the sound of my voice has probably seen the movie Blood Diamond, right? With Leonardo DiCaprio. That was artisanal diamond mining, right? And so that's your easy comparison in the context of what this is, and that is there's a lot of claim jumping going on out there. So to tie it
Yes.
back to a movie that we all know and love, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, bodges, we don't need no stinking bodges, right? So I mean, it's fluid out there, and that's artisanal mining in an African context for sure. So these dudes in the picture are enthusiasts of artisanal mining, but
Well, they're
where
environmentalists.
yes, they're environmentalists, but where this picture was taken was in Yemen, and they're all gung ho for the side that's paying them in Yemen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we are. But this slide introduces, I think, the role of the UAE, which is seminal in all of this. Because if you think that Wagner is playing both sides against the Middle East, what you're going to hopefully come to learn this evening is that the UAE is playing all sides towards the middle here, not just in Sudan, but in Libya and in Yemen and in a variety of other places. And so they've sort of taken the position that says, you know, we're happy to be arms dealers, gold purchasers, human traffickers, you know, to the whole region. From that, financiers to the whole region here. So I'm going to stop and let anybody comment on this that wants to.
Well, for one, anything, you know, I'm still rooting for the bear in the Reverend, you know, because I wanted to see
the
Leonardo
Revenant, you mean?
DiCaprio. Yeah, Leonardo
Yeah.
DiCaprio totally, you know. And then, by the way, that incident happened a couple hours north of where I live here. It's a big monument, yada yada yada. But
That's a bitchin' story, though.
it is. It's a great story of survival and determination and everything. The UAE and Qatar are probably the most evil countries in the Middle East, and believe me, there's a lot of them. You know, on one hand, you know, being our friends, and on the other hand, helping finance the Taliban and Al Qaeda.
Well, Guy Vermectin in the chat has it right. They're the Iron Bank. So if you watched Game of Thrones, right?
And I don't get HBO.
Well, okay, but if you watched Game of Thrones, there was this bank called the Iron Bank that sort of funded both sides against the middle, and that's kind of what UAE is. They are the Iron Bank. That's a great analogy.
Well, but the thing is, then we sell them all our most advanced equipment. You know, I mean, they you know, C-17s and they're on the list for, you know, all sorts of other Gucci stuff. And I don't know if they're getting the flying router or not, but at the same time, we know they're not our friend. But it's remarkable that the policymakers in D.C. continue to, you know, believe the propaganda that, you know, they're being fed by these guys. But yeah, but everything you said about the Sudan and that is absolutely spot on. And during the war on terror, I mean, we had to make some deals with the Sudanese that were. I mean, we declared them a nation supporting terrorism, and we had to make deals with these people without, you know, lessening their pariah declaration or pariah nationhood, if you will. So it was you know, it was an interesting you know, tap dance, and doing a lot of like, look over here while I'm doing this over here. So
yeah,
trying to keep Congress and everybody else over at the wrong other end of the thing. And no, it wasn't the CIA. So you all in the audience, our wonderful audience, stop. Just, it wasn't the CIA, although we helped.
All right.
The Russians, yeah. So Stan, I think one of the things that people need to understand is it's hard to get stuff out of the Central African Republic in those areas. And since you've got all this gold and all these minerals that they're trying to get out, historically, the only way is truck convoys. And if you don't have security and you don't have a pathway, the Russians want that. So they really want, you know, the road or rail across Sudan for their own, because they can't get out through Kenya. They can't get out through Somalia. Ethiopia is a bit of a mess. So Port Said, if they can get a naval base there and get control of it, then you can get your goods in and out, and it satisfies the bankers. And yeah. Somebody asked me to look at a Central African Republic deal 20 years ago, and I'm sitting here nodding my head as this young kid's explaining this to me in Belgium. And I went, how do you get stuff out? He said, trucks. I said, okay. I
On
said,
what
"Hey,
roads?
yeah, what roads and how long did the trucks last?" And then you get the and where are you going to go? And in those days, it was the Central African Republic to Mogadishu, right? It was Central African Republic to Kenya, and you just shake your head, but you understand now what the Russians are doing is they want these high value materials and the gold, and so
Right.
do the tribes.
And I think what most people that look at the map that you had up earlier, Stan, I mean, you say Texas size, but how many of us have actually spent 2 to 3 days driving across Texas?
I've done that many
Well,
times.
yeah, you have. I have. Joe's done everything because he's the most awesomest dude here. But
Oh,
well, you are. You know, eh, but I mean, how many people understand? I mean, the tyranny of distance is, remarkable, and um, people don't understand. I mean, it was like what 1,000 nautical miles from Djibouti to Khartoum. I mean, that's a long way.
I think
And
Ron just said I had a cartoon booty.
Yeah, and there are only two.
You're
There are
always
only two
focused on
Tesla
my booty,
recharge.
dude. Stop.
There are only two Tesla recharge stations between Port Said and
Oh,
Khartoum.
God.
How is the
Well-
all electric vehicle U.S. military going to cross the desert of Sudan?
Solar.
Camels.
Oh,
Solar.
Don't even start because there isn't even a place to get a good burger. I mean, so non-starter.
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah,
That's all
that comment by the energy secretary is fodder for another show. We'll come back,
Yeah.
or maybe the second half of this show, but we'll come back. We'll come back to that.
Right. But I just want to point. I mean, what Jim's pointing out is the lack of a transportation infrastructure. So you have to make numerous drug deals with all sorts of groups, tribes, militias, whatever, to go from A to B to get your product, and the trucks will break down. Somebody will want to get a taste of what you're shipping. I mean, oh my, it's terrible. There's no quick way to get from here to there. So
And all the cheap Russian transport planes are all well past their their termination date. Used to be you had free airplanes. Now you don't even have free airplanes. Right? You actually
Well,
have to buy an airplane to get fuel.
But you need to understand something, Jim. Those are just suggestions as it relates to their.
well, they make
their-
great end of runway markers now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the continent does have a lot of IL-76s just sitting around.
Well, but
that's
see,
because
but
nobody
this
maintains
goes
them.
this goes back to your comments, guys, about in a transport starved world, and you're going to see this in the slides we're going to talk about next. The one of the key aspects for the UAE to be able to do what it does in the way of solving these problems in a very lucrative manner is the fact that they do fly C-17s, just like we saw them flying out of HKIA, right, with 67,000 of our best new buddies that we didn't know who they were the 2 days before they got here, or just like we see C-17 sitting in Beijing with UAE markings, hauling electronics gear back to various locales that then on ship them to Russia and to Iran. The UAE has been using those C-17s that they bought from us to supply weapons and material and to transport goods and money for this guy Haftar, the general of the Lebanese National Army, to one side of the war in Yemen and to the RFS in the Sudan, amongst other people. So they've really capitalized on our decision to sell them state-of-the-art transport planes that can get around to these places. And they've supplanted the old Russian Tupolev and IL-76s in that context. So they've got the spice must flow, right? And so they've really been able to capitalize on this. So with that, let's go to the slide after the one we're on now. That would be the next one. So this map shows you sort of, go back to the map, please. Please. There.
Thank you.
Okay. this sort of shows sort of the collaboration or the Iron Triangle between Abu Dhabi, Sudan, Haftar in Libya, with a little bit of a goose from Wagner Group in Russia. And these various lines mean different things, like the red are supply routes for arms, the yellow is logistical support routes, the black dotted line is financial support routes, and then gold and diamond supply routes coming back the other way. And so you'll see that the hub in this triangle is really Abu Dhabi, and that it's sort of the outtake for all of the commerce that comes out of the Sudan. Some of it gets routed back to Libya, some of it gets routed to Yemen, and bits and pieces of it make their way back to Moscow to fund the Wagner Group. So it's sort of clever, and it's sort of hard to disrupt because there's nobody really in a position to sort of interdict this at this particular point. And the guy in the picture in Sudan is Hamadi, who's the RFS, who's the rebel side of. I say that with sort of mixed emotions because I think they're all rebels at this point. But he's the guy that we in the Western media want to sort of paint him as the bad guy.
Well, what's funny is that in the Western media we try to label all these people, but the truth in Africa is that strong men are going to strong man, and nobody wants to be the low man on the totem pole, and that's why this happens continually. How many wars are ongoing on the continent right now?
Several.
I'll tell you, you may laugh at Blood Diamond, but the movie is a microcosm of what actually does go on in Africa.
Yeah, it's not to be laughed at in that respect. And
during the movie, Danny is there talking to the colonel, and 9 active wars on the continent, so business is good. It's just always been that way, and the whole TIA thing. Gideon and Reaper both say that all the time in South Africa. TIA, this is Africa.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, when I watch that movie, I worry about Jennifer Connelly a lot in that movie. I want to make sure that Jennifer comes out okay in that movie. That's what's important to me. So
I'm going to tell you,
there with lots of support. I got it.
Yeah.
The best line and moment in the movie was at the bar when she says, "Rhodesia, we say Zimbabwe now, don't we?" And Danny replies to her, "Do we?" Yeah. That's the best part of the movie.
Yeah. So again, here's just a sort of a synopsis of Abu Dhabi's involvement, certainly with Wagner since 2020. But it doesn't stop there, because what you see in the other instance here is that UAE, again, capitalizing on their mobility play, has been providing military support to the Ethiopian government in its war with the Tigrayan forces. As well. So if they're pretty opportunistic about this, and if there's an opportunity to move stuff at a profit, the C-17 has replaced the Arab Dow for the UAE at this particular point. It's faster, it's more reliable, it's more comfortable, but this is a practice that the UAE has. This is a function that they have fulfilled for generations in this part of the world,
and carries more backsheesh.
It does. There's a lot of opportunity in that respect. So, next slide. So much so that this has come to be called the Abu Dhabi Express. And I think we'll take this link, and I'll stick it in the chat later, or I'll tweet it around, because this report that's at the end of this link from newamerica.org is really well done, and it's worth, if you have an interest in this part of the world and you have an interest in what's going on. It was written in late 2019, early 2020. It's a really good in-depth report on Abu Dhabi and its function as non-judgmental transport provider to everybody in the Middle East and in North Africa. So
sort of the MS-13 of the Middle East.
Well, but no, I think with a little more flair than MS-13, and not quite the ominous aspect of this. I mean, Abu Dhabi is sort of doing this. It's like flying on Emirates, right? It's,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like, I hope you had a nice flight, sir. We look forward to doing business with you again. They sort of stay above the fray, and we have a service to provide. We're the Spacing Guild, and we'll get you from point A to point B reliably.
Abu Dhabi is the guy you call when you need to get a thing to the other guy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
and it's what they've always done, right?
Yeah, it's been the
That-
function.
that-
It's been the function.
It's the modern function of what they've done with a national self-interest. They can look you in the eye and say it's in the national interest and nod, and they know what that means. I think we've kind of forgotten a lot of that, and they're good at it, and they're banking all this non-dollar stuff. So it's in their national interest to decorrelate from what we're doing, because what we're doing doesn't seem to be working so well. So they're going to hedge because they're merchants and traders.
True. Next slide. So this is what it's all about in these days in Sudan, and that's gold. It's not diamonds; it's gold, and that's the key aspect of this. And so now it gets a little murky because if I read the New York Times, what it says, or I look at Twitter, what it says is that Hamedi, who's the rebel leader, is the dude in the gold business, and the Russians are all lined up with Hamedi in the gold business because he's the biggest producer. But it seems that our friend General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has also got a little bit of gold, artisanal gold production in country. And he too sort of relies on Russian military planes and other aspects to get his stuff around. And he's not above interdicting the Sudanese military or anti-corruption officials in terms of not looking at what the Russians are doing in the context of moving illicit shipments of gold and other materials around. So it's an opportunistic world that if you can reliably get stuff from point A to point B,
Here's what's interesting.
You can get paid to do it.
The American media wants us to look at this and they say, look at what the Wagner Group is doing. Oh my gosh. Meanwhile, they can't see 96 truck convoys of oil coming from Kurdistan working their way up into Turkey.
That's right. Because we've made an issue about what the U.S. military is doing in Syria and in northern Iraq, and it's not very different from what the Wagner Group is doing. And
Joe, we've only got so many reporters. I mean, my God, man.
Right?
I mean, we can't be everywhere, and there's only so many news releases that the government can do at one time. I mean,
Yeah.
So many people who would have you believe that Ben Crump is the only attorney who will work in the black community. Crazy.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So what I want you to take away from this is that everybody's playing both ends against the middle in this part of the world. Okay. And so the guy who's our friend on Tuesday may be our sworn enemy by Friday on any given week, and vice versa. So it's tough to make intelligent decisions about, as Abbott and Costello said, who's on first and what's on second, and I don't know's on third. So you gotta keep a scorecard, and you need to do it in pencil because you don't know when it's going to change and how. So let's go to the next slide. Yemen. So here we expand our circle of buddies to the Saudis, who have picked a dog in the fight in Yemen, along with the UAE. And to give the Yemenis a little bit of backbone, they drafted about 1,500 fighters from the RSF and used them as in Toyota trucks, it appears, and used them as sort of backbone for the Yemenis in the fight with the Houthis, backed by the Saudis' new friends, the Iranians. So it's a complicated place in the Middle East. I mean, it's.
I need more whiskey.
Yeah,
It's dynamic, Stan.
It's dynamic. It's dynamic.
God, it is.
Yeah,
That's a pretty interesting graphic they have on the front windshield of every truck.
it's kind of hard to see around, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I
Well,
think what that is I think that's Hamedi's face. I think that's the guy who is the general for the RSF.
right. The Northern Alliance did the same thing with Masood. They put
Masood,
posters of him right there, and we're driving down. We're like, where? God damn it! I can't see around
Yeah,
this fucker's face.
yeah.
Do it. So
It's a
anyway.
it's a convoy marker. That's all it is.
Well, it's also an aiming point. But hey, what do I know?
Well, I think it's an IR patch, is it not? So you can,
Well, at least it's not a Jenga truck.
Yeah, oh, God.
yeah, indeed. Next slide.
So, one of the interesting things about Yemen, Stan, that I don't think most people understand is there's a profit motive to the participation in Sudan and Central Africa. There was no profit motive to the participation in Yemen. Yemen was a cost center for everybody. It doesn't have a production capacity that's interesting.
No,
And
it's not, but it sits in a pretty
it's
important
strategic.
place. Yeah,
It has a
Yeah.
geographic positioning.
has a
It's
geographic
strategic.
spot that's not
Yeah.
to be denied. So
It's like the Chicago Bears refrigerator Perry, on the defensive line. He's not very good, but by God, he's there.
Yeah. He's
Yeah.
got big arms. Once you get the hand on you, you're done.
taking up space in the right place. That's that's like Woody Allen said, 90% of life is showing up. Well, 90% of Yemen's value happens to be where it is at any given time. So that's probably that's probably this. So again, the other place that RSF and I think the takeaway here is that RSF has been blooded now for over a decade. They've fought in Darfur. They've scrapped with the government from time to time in Sudan, but they've also been seconded as shock troops in both Yemen and in Libya, and they've had 1,000 or so men sort of backing up Haftar in Libya. So they've actually got real capability in the context of they're not this. They're not like that video that you'll see on YouTube of the guy sitting around with a chimp and an AK, where the chimp starts railing at the guys with the AK. They're not those guys, okay? They've actually got some skill set here.
Those guys were definitely from the DRC. I would guarantee you that.
Yeah, that's true. And so to close the loop here, though, is that that triangle that we had in the map earlier just sort of shows you that to close the loop is that this money is moving around, this gold is moving around, weapons are moving around, transport services are moving around, and at the end of the day, it supports the RSF to a degree, which also supports Wagner, who's involved in all these places, and some of that is actually, and this is going to freak out all of you with Ukrainian flags in your profile, although I don't think we have very many of those in our chat, but. It's basically helping the Russians fund Wagner in places like Bakhmut, right? Or at least paying for their new headquarters in Moscow, which is pretty nice. If you've seen the video of it, it doesn't look like your sort of clubhouse that you might expect in that context. So this is what the United States, and here's the segue. This is what the United States is sort of up against, which is the UAE with a 3,000-year history of being a traitor to all goods and all people in that part of the world. Two militias, one with a government stamp and one with a rebel stamp, who've each got a couple decades of sort of hard fighting on both sides of the equation, and they're going to go at it now to find out who the top dog is. A war that ended with Chad that probably didn't really end at the end of Darfur. No,
It's never ended.
I know. It's just taken a pause. It's like the 100 Years' War. We don't fight during the summer planting season, but so you've got the sort of lingering animosities between this guy and the government in Chad. You've got South Sudan, which people in Sudan would probably like to have back because it's got oil, and all the other things we've talked about. And into that stumbles Roz from Monsters Inc., right? I'm sorry, Victoria Newland. So like, where's your paperwork, Wazowski? You're gonna fill this paperwork out. And Tony Blinken, who's got Joe Biden's checkbook, and he throws money at people in fly-ins and fly-outs, and demanding fealty to the United States and adoption of everything that we're jamming down people's throats here in this country and around the world. And these guys look at that and are gobsmacked by the fact that we expect them to do what we want them to do.
This is not so much as a coup to overthrow the government as it's a corporate takeover for who gets to run the grift.
Well, I think it's a function of thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you, Tony, for insisting that we have elections. We're going to have tryouts. We're not going to have elections. We're going to have tryouts. And so we're going to determine who the government in Sudan is going to be, and we're going to do it in the old-fashioned way, in sort of one-on-one combat between us, the army, and our buddies, and the RSF and its buddies. And what I think is really going to be interesting here is to see where does Egypt come down on this, because Egypt is going to have a dog in the fight, if for no other reason, going back to the water discussion that we talked about, because whoever comes out on top of this is going to have their hand on the faucet as far as Egypt is concerned, and in the context of the Nile. And so that may also engender a sort of fight with the Ethiopians who want to do certain things on their portion of the Nile as well. So this has got the capacity to go for a decade. That's my opinion. I'd like you guys to push back if you don't agree with me. But I think this has got the capacity to go on for a decade, much like Darfur did. And maybe
still is.
I was going to say, how has it not already?
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just saying
Libya. Libya's still going on. It's just we just don't have CNN cameras there anymore, and
correct.
Rich, whatever the little short shit from NBC, their foreign affairs correspondent.
Yes.
And and I mean, Chad's been going on since God. I mean, I remember on the tarmac in N'Djamena, it's fucking hot. That was back in the early '80s,
before global warming took over, right?
Yeah, it was just something like that. And God, I wish. I mean, yeah, it's just it'll ebb and flow. It'll be tidal, but it'll continue now. I mean, because as Joe pointed out, that strong men are going to strong men. I think I said that right. But now the king is dead. We have to find a new king. So a new strong man. So it's going to take a while for that to settle down, and it'll be a long time.
And in the meantime, it's not there because it really does. The tentacles sort of extend onto the west, and that is, the French have sort of been run out of Mali and run out of Burkina Faso and some other places, and who's taken their place are our friends from PMC Wagner, in many instances, and to Joe's great delight, they've brought new camo patterns to bear in all these places, and so these guys are dressed a little bit better now than they were before. But I mean, we could look around at the end of the decade and see a Russian sphere of influence that's basically across all of North Africa, for that matter, and I don't think anybody's really thinking about that, because we've decided we're going to pull Russia inside out from the belly button in Ukraine, and that doesn't seem to be going so well either.
According to the Austrians, we're going to break Russia up into like 36 countries or something.
Yeah, I've seen that. I think that a mind is a terrible thing to waste, and this is your mind on drugs. And
it's so always the smallest and least powerful countries that come up with these brilliant ideas.
Yeah, that's true. So,
well, my opinion on this is, I'm going to borrow a phrase from another war and say, let's keep them north of the Zambezi, boys, and it'll be okay.
So I think Joe makes an interesting point. This may be the peak economic model for much of North Central Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Is this kind of artisanal mining, opportunistic grift? This is the CAR has been suffering this forever, as you guys say, Darfur. it is more the natural economic model in these zones than this concept of globally financed democratic experiments.
You know,
right?
I'm going to
Well,
say
look,
something,
guys,
and
for
people are
for
going
a
to get
thousand,
upset.
wait, hang on, for 1,000 years, the product in this part of the world was other people.
That's what I was about to say.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. I was.
I was going to say that for our entire history of the European powers and Africa, the Africans have been selling their resources to the European powers, and it started with people, and has now gone to more profitable things than people, and the people are now expendable to them. Nothing has changed. This is Africa, and that's
And
not a
before they sold them to the Europeans, they sold them to the Arabs.
sold to the Arabs before that.
Well,
Absolutely.
and you guys know my affinity for movies, and so I'll give you a timely response. You can go to Amazon Prime, and you can search for a movie called Ashanti, okay? And it will give you some references for this part of the world that are pretty good. It's a story it's a movie that was made mid-60s. It's got Michael Caine and Omar Sharif and a bunch of other folks that you'll recognize. And it's about 2.5 hours. And it gives you sort of a thumbnail sketch of what human slave trafficking was in the 60s in this part of the world. And it hasn't really changed that much. Although now, if you've got gold, it's a little easier to manage. So it's a tough part of the world. It's been a tough part of the world as long as there's been human beings there. And
Yep.
it's a part of the world that really doesn't want to hear what we're selling to all aspects of the planet, because that's just not that. I talk about the Caucasus and other places still suffering from the worldview of being a zero-sum game, but here it's a real zero-sum game. I mean, life here in this part of the world is a zero-sum game, if it's that, because there's been plenty of lose-lose scenarios that have played out in this part of the world for the last 300 years as well. So this is going to get ugly. It's going to get messy, and nobody cares about it quite enough to want to go in and settle it out. And so between the Arabs and the Russians and probably soon the Chinese, they're going to continue to literally artisanally mine this area in their interests, and we'll see who comes out on top.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that sort of wraps up our conversation of Sudan, unless anybody wants to get further into it. Okay. So I think this is an important piece, and I need to cite this because the sources are sources according to Rybar on Telegram, but it makes perfect sense. So we went in and we, being the Americans, and we lavished $288 million on Burhan. And now we're not quite sure what to do, because Burhan told us to go literally pound sand because we're not going to do elections. And so now we're casting around for relevancy in this instance. And so they're reporting that basically there's an agreement that the U.S. is talking to paramilitary groups in a portion of Ethiopia to take on part of the conflict on the side of the RSF now against the people that we just gave $288 million to. We're going to pay the Ethiopians $140 million to fight on the side of the guy that we 3 weeks ago thought was the devil incarnate in the Sudan. And I think the importance of this is just the fact that we don't know what the fuck we're doing in this part of the world.
We don't.
And it shows. And we're writing. Look, I don't know about you all, but $140 million is still a lot of money to me, right? I mean, $140 million solves a lot of things in a lot of places inside the continental United States, or $288 million for that matter, or any of the other numbers. And we just throw this around on a whim with no idea or thought process as to how that gets us to where we want to be.
Well, but you forgot, Stan, that I wrote a paper in grad school, and my professor, who's now the under alternate vice deputy secretary of something or other, liked it so much that he hired me as one of his smart people. And here I am at 23 years old, and don't I look good in my Brooks Brothers suit? And I'm going to implement my fantasy policy that I wrote about without any sense of reality, because I've never left Andover, Harvard, or Georgetown, or wherever. I've never
Well,
traveled. I've never experienced. I've never breathed the air.
I've never had dysentery.
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's always fun.
And so
But don't worry, Ciprocusol.
our last slide on this, if I could, Watcher, I think the takeaway here is the highlighted piece on the next slide, and that is the Russians have positioned themselves so that, and this is the key piece, no matter which side wins, they're sitting there ready to take advantage of whoever the future Sudanese government is, with a naval base on the Red Sea and everything else that goes along with that. And so, I'm hopeful that our open-ended War Powers Act notice to the U.S. Congress isn't going to precipitate us making another series of errors where we put American forces in harm's way in a game that I would suggest to you that we've already lost at this point, because we have no way of really influencing the outcome and no standing with either side.
Yeah, and Russia's business model operates at the local equilibrium, right?
Correct.
They're coming in and they're maintaining equilibrium and doing what they want to do on the side with the people who are already there in power. We come in and begin to disparage and displace power structures. I mean, it's kind of like what we did with the Ba'ath Party in Iraq. It sounds good, it feels good, but at the end of the day, you wipe out the people who run things and you create vacuums, and opportunism and natural order backfill the vacuums. And this is opportunism and natural order in Sudan. Clearly, it's returned to equilibrium so many times in our lifetime, and we're about to go back in. I find it I'm flummoxed, I think is the word. Time again on the lack of policy.
I'm sorry to repeat this for those of you who were on Future Conflict earlier today, but the thing that differentiates our model versus not just the Russian model, but the Chinese model and other people's model who sort of look at the world for what it is as opposed to what we want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the fact that, if Hamedi or Burhan or the guy who's running Ethiopia this week or the guy who's running Chad next week want a reference, or Burkina Faso or Mali or whoever wants a reference on, okay, what does it mean if I get in bed with the Russians? They give them the number. It's called 1-800-Bashir Assad, right? Call that guy and tell him and ask him what we did. Did we cut and run on Bashir Assad? No, because it was in our interest. We wanted a Mediterranean naval port. We wanted another facility in Syria. We wanted relevance in the Middle East again, after having been out of the Middle East for 20 some odd years.
Since the 70s.
We held our nose and we backed Assad, even in the midst of chemical weapons and everything else. He was our guy. And if you're our guy, we got your back. The United States can't make that claim to anybody, not the Shah, not Saakashvili, not Guaido, not even Emmanuel Macron, for that matter. And so I don't know where we think we're going to get relevance in this part of the world, the zero-sum game of life part of the world, because they just look at us like we're foppish and frivolous and not serious. And you'll be gone next week, and we'll still be here.
What's the central tenet of our foreign policy, Stan?
Gender equality.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Russians are like the modern practitioners of the Disraeli statement. Britain has no permanent friends, has no permanent enemies. We have permanent interests.
Well, except that the Russians have actually taken it a bit further, and if you look at the relationships that they've created, even when they were in the wilderness, okay, in the Middle East, they could still pick up the phone and sell stuff to Sisi in Egypt easily, okay, and they do. They still sell, they're the largest arms sales guys to India, still, at this
Still.
particular point.
Yeah, they
And-
had to
and-
pay the headhunter for Boot to come back. I mean, they,
Well, yeah. They traded a transgender basketball player for the best arms dealer on the planet. That's like getting a first round draft pick for Doug Flutie. I mean, come on. It's just it doesn't make any
What,
sense.
you don't like Doug Flutie?
I was the first thing that came to mind. I was going
Okay,
to say
got it.
I was going
got it.
to say
You
I was
should have
gonna
said
say-
like Ryan Leaf or somebody like that. I mean,
yeah,
another
that's true. Although but
Come on.
not enough people remember Ryan Leaf. Everybody
Well,
remembers
there's a
Doug Flutie.
reason for that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say
Anyway.
Jimmy Garoppolo, but I actually like Jimmy Garoppolo, and I don't want to piss on Jimmy Garoppolo. But
Anyways,
anyway, I think that's the measure of and what drives that is that the Russians are acting in Russian, as you said, as Disraeli said, they're acting in Russian national interests.
right?
You're a son of a bitch, but you're our son of a bitch, and we used to have that for a while, but we don't anymore because we've talked ourselves into.
Well, it's all about human rights and equity and gender equality and all sorts of issues that are repugnant to the rest of the world. And it
but
doesn't
also
fly.
things that don't have an economic value.
Exactly.
And that's where I think we fall off the bus. We prohibit economic value and economic development in name of these things. And then when people look at the model, and there's so much transparency global now, people look what happens in the United States, how we behave and what our priorities are, and they just shake their heads and walk away. And we look at them and go, oh my, you're so unsophisticated. And they look at us and go, oh my God,
You're
You know,
fools.
you can't even determine what a boy or a girl is.
You don't even have
How
a
am I
border.
supposed to understand? How am I supposed to understand what you're selling me?
Yeah, we have an associate justice on the Supreme Court who can't define what a woman is. I got it.
So, all right. Well, I think
Next
we'll leave that. I think we'll leave that at this particular point. I feel like Mr. T in this regard, in as Clubber Lang in Rocky III. My prediction is pain. I mean, I think we're going to have pain in this part of the world for a decade or better, and I
The
think
whole world.
we've done a whole bunch of nothing to sort of keep that from moving on. So, in the concept of pain, we'll move on to topic 2, and I'm sorry to double team this. And this is all I could do for this, to be honest with you.
Oh
There's
my
one
God.
there's one slide, okay?
Oh,
Thank you.
But I don't think we need a lot of statistics. I think this can be a free-flowing conversation because we all know the issues. But this was the 3-minute little video that announced Joe Biden's renewed candidacy to occupy the White House until the age of 86. And if you watch this, as I did, and I watched it a couple of times, a couple with the sound off and a couple with the sound on, I don't recognize America in this video. I'm sorry. It's not necessarily, it doesn't speak to the country and or the country's problems in a way that makes me want to vote for this guy. And I know that comes as a shock to y'all, but I do know who it is pointed at. It's pointed at suburban white women who freak out on abortion, and then everybody else who's standing in line for reparations or other aspects of largesse from the federal government. And you're going to see Barack Obama makes an appearance in this for about half a second, unless we've gone by it, because it's easy to miss. So I guess the thing that I worry about at this point, and that I'm really not looking forward to, is the highly likely prospect of Biden versus Trump again. And I really worry about that in the context of the even more pressurized sort of divide that makes up the country at this point, because we both know both these bastards. And I'm not sure that any of us would have them on the top of our list if we could pick anybody to run the country. There, that was Barack. He was there for just a minute. He was making sure Joe could make it down the portico there. And so I just don't, if this is the choice we have, is between these two octogenarians that have demonstrated their dysfunction in the Oval Office, each of them, or by that time, each of them for about 4 years at that point. And I'm not throwing Trump under the bus. He had some good ideas, but he was naive as hell. He didn't know how to pick personnel, and he got used by the vaccine lobby in the context of the COVID thing. And Joe Biden is just somebody who's trying to finish the job, as this video says, and fundamentally change the nature of the country in a way that I think is adverse for our interests. So help me, guys, and chat, help me figure out, what do we do with this in 2024? Let me be candid. I've said that I think this election is going to be the match that by the time you get to the inauguration of the context of another fortified election, whoever wins is going to be the impetus for real conflict in the country. I believe that. I've thought that for 3 years, and I'm acting on the basis of believing that. I don't want to be right about it, but I don't see anything that's going to tell me that I'm wrong. My real worry with this is that this rematch, if it stands, and all of the animus that's on both sides of this, we don't get to Q1 2025.
Well, I'll be honest. The fact that they're running Joe Biden again tells you they plan to fortify it, because Joe Biden couldn't win an election as a dog catcher right now.
73% of Americans of all stripes, okay, independent, Democrat, Republicans, don't want Joe Biden to run again. And yet
they're going to run him yet because they know how it's going to go.
And here we are. They're going to run him. They're even making noises about keeping Kamala around, which I think is, I'm going to get to that in a minute. But they've gerrymandered the primary schedule such that South Carolina, which won this for Joe last time around, is now first in the nation. And James Clyburn has said it's over. And we're not even going to have, the DNC has said, I don't care who runs, we're not going to have debates on the Democratic side. It's over. South Carolina, punch your ticket. The rest of you, you don't need to show up. We'll tell you how you voted in the primaries. So what do you do against that? I'm looking for the vote harder crowd to tell me what to think.
Well, first off, your statement about no matter who wins is incorrect. As Joe pointed out, it's going to be another fortified election, stolen election, however you want to put, because nothing has been done to, fix, mitigate, correct the problems of the last 3 elections since 16 and, 18 and then 20. So, I mean, Joe Biden could sit there and he could be weekend at Bernie's the entire campaign season, and
he has been as president.
Well, yeah, but I mean, even more so, and he can just chill out in Delaware or in the White House and go out occasionally and make some, it's national, plant a tree day or whatever, and rail against the evil MAGA Republicans, and yeah, I mean, he's a shoo-in, and I don't think and people keep hoping for Trump, and I agree with you. I mean, Trump's a great campaigner. He has that good personal touch. He can interact well with the crowds, and when he walks the line and the way he has that little Reagan-esque thing where, hey, here's all the motorcycle cops that escorted me. Let me go over and shake their hand and make them feel good. I mean, he's really good at that. But as you pointed out, he can't pick personnel to save his life. And then when he has to rely on his son-in-law, who has all sorts of baggage of his own, it's like, no, dude. You pick all these people for these most important positions because, well, I've never really been part of the Republican Party, so I'm going to have Reince Priebus as my first chief of staff, and he's going to advise me. Oh my God, dude, you just negated your entire election.
Yeah.
So no, he's not the, and the way they're busy, taking DeSantis down, saying he's a Paul Ryan clone and he's this and he's that, and and the Laura Loomers and and the these and the those are all doing their. It's like, I mean, the Democrats are just going like, "Hey, this is great. We could run Joe Biden the corpse, and the Republicans are just going to devour themselves." It's I think somebody said in the chat, I don't even know if we're going to get to the first quarter of 2025. I think 2024, the primary season is just going to be horrendous, because you're going to see these small groups, of Trump supporters or Republicans or anti-drag show people or whatever, try to organize something, and the Antifa thugs, the BLM thugs, will come out and just start wailing on them. And I mean, come on, Stan, we haven't even seen, the U.S. Marshals are under direct order not to enforce federal law to protect the Supreme Court justices' residences. They're supposed to arrest these people, and because they're violating the law. But no, the right to protest, it's okay. They can do that. And hey, Virginia State Troopers, you can't do anything because this is a federal problem. Why aren't you guys doing anything? It's okay, guys. We're taking care of it. Merrick Garland has said we can't do. I mean, it's just, sorry. It's the pain has not reached the average American yet, to the point where they're going to go, enough of this crap, and they go to their local county commissioner or their local city council and they say, WTF, what are we doing about it? And if you don't give me the right answer, well, I got a lamppost out here and I got a length of rope, and guess what, dude? You're going to be hanging. So, I mean, it's to the point where when people get to that point, it's going to be grim, and it's going to happen quickly. The veneer of civilization in this country will rapidly disappear, and it will scare the shit out of so many people. And all these, half of the Twitter, gun Twitter crowd and survivalist Twitter crowd, they're all going to wet their pants because, oh, I'm not ready. I haven't read all of Joe's books yet. So sorry.
Goon Twitter.
Hey, I like Goon Twitter.
But so take that and let's move it to the next step, and that is,
okay.
Let's assume that it plays out that way, and I still think that there's an arm of the Democratic Party who really doesn't want Joe to run, and I think Gavin Newsom is probably the person that they would rather have run, not because of his track record. You can't run on a track record as it relates to what's going on in California. But I would say in normal situation, you can't run on the track record that Joe Biden has put together as president either. Okay. So what that tells us is that the narrative is controlled, it's locked down, and it doesn't matter what the truth is, because we've spent 60 years conditioning the American people to believe what they're told by the media about what's going on in the country. And please don't pay attention to what your experience is. We're going to tell you what's going on in your country, and you're going to believe it. And if you don't, then, there's a place for you too. It's just not very comfortable. So let's take that metaphor and let's say that whoever the Democratic nominee is, whether it's Joe Biden or they've handcuffed him to Kamala to cull them both and install a different ticket partway through this process, that person is going to win, and they're going to get 82 million votes this time, as opposed to 81 for Joe Biden. And the thing is, they've gotten better at this process. In 2016, I remember I stayed up all night to watch this. I remember screaming at the television when they stopped counting votes in all the swing states simultaneously, screaming at the television as it relates to the water main that broke at the polling station in Georgia that really didn't happen. Okay, screaming at the television in Detroit where they were putting up the boards so that you couldn't look into where the counting room was. Screaming at the television when there were suitcases full of empty ballots that were being dropped off or pulled out from underneath desks in suitcases when they didn't think the cameras were on them, and all of that stuff. And it was a shit show. The fix was bad, but they got it done. In 2022, the fix was a lot better. Okay, Fetterman got elected in Pennsylvania without a whole lot of fuss.
That was like electing a head of lettuce, for the record.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And Kerry Lake got unelected in Maricopa County, and nobody batted an eye as what
And
happened.
she's still fighting it.
And she's still, kudos to her. She's still fighting it, but it's
Yeah.
going to be too little, too late. And so they have gotten better and better and better. Did I say 2016, Rick? I'm sorry if I did that. I meant 2020. They have gotten better and better and better at this fix. And now Dominion's got $800 million worth of Murdoch's money to really grease the skids in the context of fixing these elections.
And
Yeah,
the
well,
first
Lake
thing
may
they
have been
did was fire
Lake
Tucker.
may have been an awful candidate, Lone Wolf Ranger, but her positions were in the right positions. And you can't tell me that the Secretary of State that oversaw her own election as the governor of Arizona was a great candidate either. I mean, we don't produce a lot of great candidates in this country any longer. And
No, we don't.
and as evidence of that, I'll give you Trump v. Biden 2.0. I can't believe that in a country with the number one economy in the world, the number one military in the world, and supposedly 350 million smart people, that the only people we can come up with to run the country are Joe Biden and Donald Trump. That's false on its face, y'all.
Mhm.
That's proof that you're already in a collapse, for the record.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yep.
And so, yeah, there are no perfect candidates, okay, other than Ronaldus Magnus, who was, in my mind, pretty close to being a perfect candidate. But the point is that they're all human beings, and we don't produce a lot of perfect people. But the point is that the system is such that you'd have to be perfect, and I'm not sure Jesus Christ could come down and get elected at this particular point, given the scenario as it plays out in the United States, given the array of evil that has been, that's ready to pounce on anybody who strays from the orthodoxy of the left. We have to kill babies on demand, and you get to pick what flavor chocolate you are. Sorry, it doesn't work that way, guys.
Well,
So,
no, one other comment. So here in South Dakota, we're pretty. We still have, our ballots are done via optical character reader. They're not connected to the internet. And it's pretty low keyed. I mean, nothing. But there is so much distrust, even here in South Dakota, of the election process, the balloting system, just the whole thing is like the legitimacy of the elected officials and of the elections themselves is deteriorating rapidly. And the unfortunate thing is the politicians, don't realize it. I mean, we see this all the time in D.C. The Uniparty, the, the, the Republicans and Democrats united in, let's send more money to Ukraine. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's pass the Restrict Act, whatever. And they don't seem to realize that this is not what the people want. I mean, at least the Republican base, for the most part, wants, but they don't care because the donor class says, no, this is what we want. And through the little people, they will continue to work. They will continue to pay their taxes. They will continue to adhere to whatever we tell them. They will, we will impose new Second Amendment restrictions on them. We will impose speech restrictions on them. And they will adhere because they will just dutifully march to the mine and do their little thing for 12 hours a day and then march to the little hovel.
yeah,
I mean, it's
but are they? But is that true, Ron? And so my premise, and let me just lay this out, and you can pick it apart if you want. But my premise is that there's enough people who are sort of scratching their heads today that are sort of gobsmacked by the latest attack on normalcy in their lives at their
not enough
kids.
though.
Well, okay, but hang on, let me finish. And I think on a daily basis, people sort of the pennies dropping for them, and as they continue to pay $3.50 or so a gallon for gas, as they continue to see, they're told that inflation's come down from 9% to 5%. I don't see it. I don't see it anywhere. I made this comment earlier today, and I thought about it just to make sure that I wasn't just reacting to it off the cuff. But I don't see that inflation is coming down anywhere. Maybe in the price of eggs that have come back to sort of a reasonable sort of price, but not in anything else. Any processed food that you pick up in the grocery store or anywhere else or anything else along those lines continues to go up on a daily basis in my experience.
Mhm.
And from a travel perspective, if you've booked an airline ticket recently, and you realize what you're paying for an economy class ticket to go, let's say, from St. Louis to Montana or back. I mean, these are not big hubs, and maybe that's part of the problem. But the point is that to fly in a shitty little Brazilian airplane, the price of that continues to go up
Yeah.
at an astronomical rate. The price of hotels continues to go up at an astronomical rate. The price of everything continues to go up. Okay.
Yeah.
You can buy an $85,000 pickup truck. That on its face is stupid, right? I mean, it just is. It's a pickup truck, right? And so we continue to be eaten alive by inflation. And now when we get to this second half of the year, when not just the tech companies, but other companies are going to start to cut headcount. Amazon's going to cut 27,000 corporate jobs this
Yeah.
week. Okay. And some of these people are not going to know what to do about that, because the people that work at Amazon at corporate jobs aren't going to work at Facebook for Mark Zuckerberg to build the metaverse, because he's done with that for now. Okay.
Well, just tell them
And,
to learn to code.
yeah, well, they do. Many of them do know how to code. And so some of these people that are being laid off are being laid off at the mothership. And I don't mean the place where you buy cheap Chinese goods for pennies
No,
on
I
the
got it.
dollar, but at AWS, at Amazon Web Services. Okay. And that's a sea change. And so as this
Yep.
unemployment, as the Fed gets what it wants and starts pushing the unemployment rate up, and in the face of all this sort of stuff, I think more and more people, and against the backdrop of now political violence, political animosity, everything not working, continued sort of gun violence, if you want to call it that, in the context of this stuff, I think a lot of the normies are going to get pushed over the edge between now and the end of 2024. Is it going to be enough? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is. And I think if the election is a complete shit show on top of all of that, then I think the answer is
Yeah.
that much like the 1861 inauguration of Abraham Lincoln was the point at which South Carolina said no mas. Okay. I think this has the potential to push a lot of the normies, and you don't need all of them. Statistics show you need about 10%, and that's
Right.
enough to sort of start the process.
Just make sure the 10% aren't those stalwart Michigan patriots who live in the basement type of thing.
I don't think they are, though, Joe. Ron, I don't think. I think those people will have been consumed by then. Okay,
I certainly hope so.
I think the traps are baited for those guys, and Joe can speak to that. I mean, the guys the Whitmer crowd.
Those guys were functionally illiterate morons that were picked for that reason.
But I mean, I'm talking about people like you and me and everybody else that sort of, we've been around, we've done some stuff. We're not card carrying rabble rousers. We're just people who have said enough.
Right.
Yeah.
I
think that's right.
You've poked me in the chest enough, and I'm not doing this anymore.
Well,
yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
And like I go back to my earlier statement, I think when enough people, when it reaches that magical 10%, either and I maybe more local in locally or regional areas where it has a more amplified impact. I mean, like, remember the American Revolution really began in Boston, and the Carolinas and Georgia really didn't join until the latter half of the Revolution type thing. So, but I could I could see something like that happening. But what I'm afraid is that I don't think people understand what okay, so now we're here, the fuse is lit, we're storming the Bastille. What's the next thing? What's the second and third order effect? Where do we go from here? And if we're looking for a George Washington or a Thomas Jefferson or even a John Adams to, guide, shape, philosophize, lead the the revolution, I'm looking around the political landscape. I don't see anybody.
I think that person's going to come out of nowhere. I think somebody's going to become the Hamedi, if you will, of the. I don't think that person exists on the political stage as we speak.
No, definitely not.
Okay, I think,
Definitely.
and you don't need a new Thomas Jefferson. The old one works just fine.
He
Okay?
might be a humble duke from Montana.
But you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying, Stan. I mean, I'm saying I'm looking for somebody who can inspire, but yet who's rational, who's not gonna,
So
do a Joe Rogan thing or like
No,
where
but
I want them all dead.
no,
Whatever.
I'm not suggesting that. But nobody heard of Vladimir Putin in 1999 either. Nobody knew who he was, right? No,
Well,
they didn't.
almost nobody.
Almost
Well,
nobody.
no.
But the point is, and I that's just the first thing that came to mind. But the point is that I don't think that this is, and it's not going to be a Bundy in Idaho either. But I mean, the point is that the point is that I don't think that this is going to be a a response led by the anointed. I don't think it's going to happen that way. I think it's going to be a response that is led by people in their locales just saying, we're not doing this anymore, guys. And you won't leave us alone. We'd like it if you just leave us alone and let us live our life the way you want, and you stay on that side of the fence and you do whatever you want to do in these blue hellholes. Okay. And yes, you can yak at us about, you need our tax money. We don't, but you can, if that makes you sleep at night, you can yak about that. And we'll laugh at you about, well, you've got nothing to eat and no energy unless you get along with us. And we'll live in separate but equal sort of bedrooms at that point. But they won't allow that. That's the key aspect, is that the left is not going to miss the opportunity to try to exert control over the whole of the American political spectrum.
A while back there was a trend in the young adult
and I want Jim to speak to this, because I think the Chinese model 49 is applicable in this instance.
Or 89.
Or 89. That's true too.
So Stan, you're going to stand in front of the Abrams tank as it rumbles down?
No. I've got my stock with the motor oil on it. I watched Private Ryan. I know how to make a sticky bomb, so don't worry about it. I'm not standing in front of that sumbitch. I'm just going to slap it on the side. But
Yeah, I don't think the government can keep itself from maintaining itself. It's got this need of perpetuation of the bureaucracy. And, we saw little bits of it. We saw MacArthur, breaking up the riots in the 1920s. And I think we still have the same capacity as a government. And I think the difficulty now is everybody has access to information and they're trying to stop that. I mean, Ron, you pointed that out, which is, they want control over the information. So they're trying to figure out how to shut the spigots off if they need to. I think if there's a lot of discord in this country around this next election, puts us at great risk. I don't think most people understand what that means. It isn't pretty, and it isn't romantic. It isn't a Washington, party. It's not a Hollywood movie.
You're not going to grab your flintlock over the mantle and rush off to join Paul Revere and have the impact that you think that those guys did at that particular point. It's different than that this time around. Big time. And so I think it's going to, I think because of that at the outset, it's going to be ugly. It's going to be choppy. It's going to be spotty. And it's going to be widespread. I think it's going to, every place where blue rubs up against red. Okay. And in a lot of instances, those are suburban neighborhoods outside of big cities. Okay. Sort of the heartland, the American dreamland. Okay. and for those of us who are old enough to remember what that meant. And I think those people have been sheltered for a long period of time, and the normalcy bias is going to get evaporated in a really short period of time.
The second piece that I find interesting in this is the U.S. government's cozying to transnational groups other than governments. So the desire to engage with groups in Europe and Asia that support the concepts of central government, strong government, national economic modeling and planning. The people like the WEF who look at the American individual freedoms and liberties as being a terrible inconvenience to the global stability model. I think if we do find periods of instability in this next couple of election cycles, I think there'll be an international support component to the core of our government that is unanticipated. So I think the Europeans would very much like to see us adapt to their thinking. I think the Canadians would like to see us, the government, adapt to their thinking. I know the Mexican government would. We need to be controlled.
International support element? God, that sounds a lot like, gosh, what is that? What are those two initials?
I don't know.
United Nations?
Oh, I'm not going to say. I wasn't going to say that wrong.
Well, yeah, but
I talked around it as best I could.
You did a great job. It's just, I'm sorry, I did go to community college, and so I did pick up on it. So,
well, as we're getting old enough now that we have blue hair, we're allowed to talk about that.
This is not blue. This is wisdom gray.
Wisdom gray. I get the feeling. I just get the feeling that the folks who really want to globalize us are very tight with the people who would support that model should we have crisis here. And the language and the media circus that would occur globally about the Americans not getting in line would become very aggressive very quickly. And they would try to turn us into a pariah very, very, very quickly.
I'm sorry, but don't fucking threaten me with a good time.
Well, I think even the Pakistanis would think twice about being blue helmet guys in this country, because it ain't going to be like Haiti. It isn't going to be like Bangladesh. It's not going to be like the places where these guys tend to go. You can ask the Russians about what it's like being peacekeepers in Karabakh. It's not a lot of fun. And so yeah, I hear you. And I wish Mike were here, because Mike often accuses me of being pessimistic about the future of the country, and that's not true. There's big swaths of it that I'm sort of indifferent to, because I think they've made their bed. I think they've made their bed and they can lie in it. But I do believe that there's big swaths of the country where what made America America still exists. And I think it's been taught to people, and I think it's been taught to people who now feel massively alienated by what's wrought. And a lot of them are people who have traditionally, their kids have gone into the U.S. military, and they're scratching their head now because that pathway is gone for them, because they don't think the way that our military brass thinks any longer. Okay. They're not worried about the things that our military command structure is worried about, in the context of creating an army that kills people and breaks things, or at least does it with the appropriate ESG score or DEI diversity label attached to it. And I think those people, I don't want to sound corny about this, and I know we got a couple of super chats we need to do here in just a minute, but I don't want to sound corny about this, but I think there's enough of those people out there. God knows I know a number of them. Whether it's enough or not remains to be seen. But I think there's enough of them that just are going to be pushed when the guy who's the construction worker or better yet, the guy who's a small contractor loses his $84,000 pickup truck that he can't do his job without because it's repossessed at a 9% interest rate on an 84-month loan. Okay, because the construction that he does is no longer representative of environmental justice to the federal government, right? He can't do his job because he can't comply with the environmental justice requirements that they're going to make up on the back of an envelope to shut him down. When that guy loses his company, he's going to become a hard man in a hurry.
I know a group of loosely affiliated guys who are trying to train men for those days.
Well, I understand that, Joe, and that's why we're all here, I think, to one degree or another. But the point is, it's going to be sloppy and it's going to be ugly and it's going to be brutal. But it's going to be necessary, I believe. I hope you guys can prove me wrong. But I think it's gonna be necessary because I just don't think we want to go into that good night quietly. I don't want to be regular, and I don't want my son to be regulated into that environment. My two older daughters are old enough they can make their own way in the world and are. But I've got an 11-year-old son, and I don't want him to live in the world that I see coming. On many levels, and I'm sorry to get personal about this, but this is how I feel. This is how I feel about it, and I think that's a bad outcome. I think it's a bad outcome for the world, let alone one state or two states or a group of 4 states who band together. I think it's a bad outcome for the world in terms of the loss of meritocracy, the loss of ambition, the loss of capitalism, for that matter.
Loss of the last best hope on earth.
Yeah, well, it's become meme fodder, but there are memes that go around. We've all seen them that says there's no place to go from here, right?
Yeah,
This is it. And I want to think that there's enough people who care enough about this and who recognize the evil that's being perpetrated towards us that there's enough to win the day. And I don't want to sound like Churchill here, but on the beaches, on the whatever. I mean, I think that's what we're looking at before it's all said and done. And well-armed Cargie, yes, national divorce now, but this is going to be a fighting divorce, pal. You better understand that.
Well, and how do you actually work that out? I mean, it's
You're
just
not
doable.
well, it is doable. It has to be doable. But the point is, you're not going to go to court and file a brief and say, I hereby declare this county is now part of, red blob versus blue blob. It isn't going to be Robert's Rule of Order. It's not going to be Marcus of Queensberry. Okay. And a lot of the people that we make fun of in various parts of the world who know how to fight this fight, who fought this fight for decades, like the guys that speak Pashto in the place we just got our ass run out of, right? Those guys understand it. They get it. And the question is going to be how many people like that are here.
For the record, if we had left Ron in charge, none of that would have happened.
Yeah.
Well, we would have been out of Afghanistan if we were there after the 2-year mark. We'd been there a year too long. So
you are not wrong, brother.
I know, and that's what I told the Undersecretary of Defense one time. And
they don't call it the graveyard of empires for nothing.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I get that, but the point is that we lost sight of the mission.
Yes.
In Afghanistan, and it turned into turning Afghanistan into a 21st century democracy. The leap was not going to be made. Okay, I'm sorry, and so I don't want to relitigate that.
Please don't. Makes my head hurt.
That ship has sailed. Okay,
and sunk.
And the point is that we've got issues and interests and rights
right here at home
to be adjudicated in the next 3 or 4 years that I need people to start thinking about that, as opposed to even, fuck the Sudan. The Sudan is intellectually interesting. It's comical to one degree. It's sad. It's a repetition of every dumb fucking thing we've done for 20 years. But it's not material at this particular point, to my way of thinking about what the nation needs to care about.
Stan's getting worked up. Awesome.
Well, I am.
Good.
I'm sorry.
Well, and I just want to say one thing, Stan. So, we sit here and we talk about this, and I know people in the chat, they throw out their, opinions on this and opinions on that, and that's all well and good, and I appreciate that, and we see people on Twitter putting out memes and or whatever, but do you people actually fucking do anything? Do you actually go to a school board meeting regularly? Do you go to a city council meeting regularly? Do you go to a county commission meeting regularly? Do you go to a library board meeting? I mean, any one of these little, getting involved. Are you doing anything about it? Or are you just sitting back on your laptop going, "Oh, I'm going to do a meme." Like, no.
Well,
I'm sorry. If you're not
I-
doing anything about it, you can complain all day long, but you're going to be one of the 90% that's going to be, in the corpse pile.
I agree with you, Ron. I keep seeing
You
these
guys-
people say all this stuff about what they're gonna do. Yet when I'm actually out here at these events, either doing like I am tonight, providing protection, or I'm inside the event gathering intelligence, I'm not running into those people. And I'm no one special. Anyone could do that, but they don't. And
Yeah.
it gets to my neighborhood, I'll do something. They don't have to
and
come to
when
your
it
neighborhood, bro.
and when it happens, guys, to use the Red Dawn analogy, okay, there's going to be a lot of people inside the drive-in theater.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
Yep.
we get that. I understand that. That's a given. Okay. I can't help those people, but
I don't want to.
that's neither here. I'm not prepared to do that at this point, but I'm not here to help those people. I think the people you got to care about are the people who are farsighted enough. And again, the American Revolution was won with 5% of the population involved in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what that's the test. That's the mark. Okay. And what was the largest number of people that the Taliban had under arms at any given point in the Afghan conflict?
Not many.
Not many. Okay. So now let's do the
1,000.
Vietnamese. Now let's do the Vietnamese. Okay. As a percentage of the population, how many people were in the Viet Cong? Don't tell me about the NVA. I mean, that army came and they cleaned up after the Viet Cong kicked our ass. Period. End of story. And so the aspect is that it doesn't take everybody, but everybody benefits if those people are ready and willing and prepared to fight for what we think we need to fight for in order to maintain our way of life.
And if you want to get ready, willing, and prepared to do those things, buy my books.
Yeah, that's true, and that's true. That's no bullshit. But the point is, and I don't want to throw the first punch. I'm not looking to throw the first punch.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I know I'm going to get punched at some point in this process.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't want to be the guy behind the wire yelling, "Avenge me."
Yeah.
Listen, I'm going to disagree with you both. I'm probably going to end up in that camp, but I will have come in under the wire. I might be a little bit older and a little bit slower and carry a few more pounds, but I'm not willing to leave folks there. I'm willing to try and let them stand on their own 2 feet. So,
but I just, and I'm sorry to get wrapped around the axle here.
Just take your baseball glove and your ball with you, Joe. So when you're in the cooler, you can do the Steve McQueen thing. And
true.
Great Escape. Come on.
All right,
I'm not as old as you guys.
I'm not as, but so we're at 2 minutes or 2 hours and nearly 20 minutes, and I it's going to become repetitive at this point.
It's bedtime.
But it's this is what I fear out of this election. Is that this is the point at which this process reaches critical mass, okay? And the chain reaction starts, and the control rods aren't going to work in the reactor at this time. And I just hope that people, I'm not asking you to grab a rifle. I'm not asking you to do any of that sort of stuff, but I am asking you to do this. I am asking you to think that if your world got abnormal in a hurry, okay, what are you going to do in order to maintain your ability to function in as a citizen in this country? And I think you start with that. And so how do you maintain and how do you provide for your family, and what do you do in that regard in the context when you can't run to Costco because Costco doesn't have anything in it anymore, okay? Or Sam's Club doesn't have, my favorite $4.99 Virginia peanuts, right? And so what do you do in that instance? And how do you maintain functionality as a family and as a citizen in a scenario where all those things are being challenged? And we're not the first people who are going to go through it. Europe's gone through it twice at a scale that we don't even understand in the last 100 and some odd years.
Yeah.
Okay. Other countries have gone through it. And I'm going to make this suggestion to you, and I'd like you to think about this. Okay. Everybody likes to make fun of the Russians and the Soviet Union and what have you. But if I will say to you today that if the United States breaks apart, I don't think that 20 years on we'll be as recovered as the Russians have been in the period of time. I really don't, because I think that the splintering that will go on. There's not that much animosity between Kazakhstan and Russia, okay? But the animosity between Boston and Peoria is pretty deep. It's pretty dire. The animosity between San Francisco or Portland, let's just pick Portland. The animosity between Portland, okay, and Helena, Montana, that's a gulf I don't think you're going to close anytime.
That's for Rwanda levels, actually. If you're being honest with yourself, it really is.
It is. And so I just don't know that we've got the ability to sort of pull this back together, and that's got implications for foreign interests as well. And we haven't ever talked about that, but one day we will.
Back to my international point. The coastal cities would have foreign participation.
Yeah. Oh, there's no question about it.
Well,
there's no question about it.
Good thing that one California port system just contracted for a port management system, and somebody overseas is writing that code.
Can't imagine.
Yeah, it's in China.
I can imagine. Yeah, of course.
All right, well,
Stan, it's been a blast.
We've sort of beat this to death, but and I'm not going to talk about this every week. I'm not even going to talk about it again for quite some time. But I wanted to put a marker down in the context of, if we're going to suffer the slings and arrows of this fucked up election again, Trump v. Biden, I want you to be thinking about that it's not going to be a normal outcome any more than the last one was, but it's going to be multiples of abnormality on top of that in this go around. And I'd like you to be thinking about what you need to do to be ready for it. First of all, for your own survival and well-being and everything else. And secondly, hopefully in the context of preserving those things which some of us hold really dear. And let me tell you why, okay? I've been to most places on the planet in my life. And I think Jim can say something similar to that. Ron, probably not far behind. But I've been to, I think it's 140 countries in my travels, okay? I've seen the really good stuff. I've seen the really shitty stuff. And I still believe that the model that is the United States, at its core, and frankly, at its simplest, okay, in its most derivative form, from the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution of the United States, without all the embellishment that political parties like to layer on top of it, is still the best thing for human beings. And apparently, there's millions of human beings that still think that, because they cross our southern border every day. They haven't gotten the message yet. And so I think it's worth fighting for.
Hear, hear.
And that's where I am in this.
And I'll say it again. We're not talking about fighting a revolution. We're talking about fighting a restoration. Big difference.
Yeah, that is true. Well, I'm going to go
Tomato,
one step
tomato.
further. I don't think it's not. I don't think it's a restoration, and I don't think it's a revolution. I'll tell you what I think it is, and you've heard me say this in smaller groups. I think it's a counter revolution.
Yeah.
I think that it's a counter revolution. We got all the revolution we need now. Okay, it's a revolution of the leftist authoritarians that are trying
Let
to
me tell you,
trying to
watch the
tear down.
speech Liz Wheeler gave tonight. That's exactly what she said. So,
And so I think it's a counter revolution that faces us in order to restore many of the rights and responsibilities and the thought processes.
What?
Uh,
Responsibilities? I'm not
Well,
responsible.
I know. I know.
Agitation 101.
Yeah. But the rights and responsibilities that we have.
Okay,
as
Watcher
citizens-
needs to go, guys.
I'm getting tired too.
All right. I'm sorry. This stuff doesn't come out very often, but when it does, it's hard for me to put a cork in it. And I'll do that now at 2 minutes and 25 seconds and 15 minutes or whatever. But
All right.
Watcher,